If you followed the site much over the past few weeks, you will recognize this. This is ASUS's ePad Transformer Prime. It's actually my third sample. If you followed the site, you'll know that the first one had horrible Wi-Fi performance. The second one had better, but still kind of finicky Wi-Fi performance. This third sample is actually out of the retail lot. So this is what all the guys who pre-ordered and people buying them in stores this week, this is what you're getting, much improved than the thing I tested and the thing everyone reviewed just a couple weeks ago. To the left of it is another ASUS ePad Transformer. This is the original. This thing is still on sale. It's still selling for $399, still based on Tegra 2. Both are still running Honeycomb. Hopefully both will get upgraded to Ice Cream Sandwich early next year. But this is the one we want to talk about. Aesthetically, it looks great. It is thinner, lighter, better in pretty much every way than its predecessor. And it kind of has to be to justify the $100 price increase. It's all aluminum construction. The display is brighter, has better contrast ratio, and actually can get even brighter outdoors. ASUS has this Super IPS Plus mode that'll send brightness up actually above 600 nits, so brighter than the BlackBerry Playbook if you need it. Obviously, that takes its toll on battery life, but given that this thing is designed to be not only a tablet, but when docked with this docking station, can actually be like a netbook replacement, you might be using this thing outdoors, and you might want to have a display that can go bright enough, and this thing thankfully can. As I mentioned, it has a great contrast ratio. We measured about 1200 to 1, so that actually makes it better than any other tablet we reviewed, iPad included. Resolution's still stuck at 1280 by 800. So it's my understanding that everyone wants to go to these really, really high resolution displays next year. Apple's definitely going to for whatever they do next. And by the end of the year, a lot of the Android players are as well. We might see 1920 by 1080 or 1920 by 1200 panels appear, and then things even higher. The issue right now is yields on those panels aren't very, very good. And as a result, you're either going to pay a lot for them, which a lot of these vendors aren't interested in doing, given that they are definitely trying to maximize profit margins and at the same time trying to deliver these things at competitive price points. Or you can wait for yields to improve. And the current thinking is that yields will improve, but it'll be towards the end of next year. So the first kind of new wave of Android tablets will be running at the original 1280 by 800 resolution, which is what this is running at today. It's a 10.1 inch screen. And like I said earlier, the screen quality is amazing. It's a huge improvement over this. Actually, you can't really see it here, but one of the complaints we originally had about the first ePad Transformer was the gap between the outer glass and the actual LCD panel itself was great enough that you got extra reflections that you really didn't want. That's pretty much been addressed here. There's also a oleophobic coating on the display that makes fingerprints easier to get rid of. You actually get a little microfiber cloth in the box this time to help you in that process. So overall, this thing is better. It's easier to carry around. It's nicer to hang on to. It's still big, it's not Kindle Fire sized, but because of the thickness or thinness, because of the weight, it's something that you actually don't mind carrying around with you. And ASUS is actually supposed to have a smart cover kind of clone, similar to what the iPad 2 has, coming out sometime in the coming months, although we haven't seen one here yet or have any idea how it works. As I mentioned, you can get this optional dock for $149. This almost doubles battery capacity, so there's a separate battery in here. That's what you're basically paying for with $149. You get a full QWERTY keyboard. The key feel is excellent. It's kind of like typing on a MacBook Air. If you're okay with that type of a chiclet feel, it works really well. It's got a built-in trackpad, which does integrate with Honeycomb quite well. I'm not the biggest fan of the trackpad on this. I much prefer scrolling using the capacitive touchscreen itself, but the trackpad can suffice if you really need to have that. My major complaints with the trackpad are just scrolling on it isn't very smooth. The surface itself isn't very smooth. I would hope for kind of a more glass-covered, slick surface, which tends to just improve the overall user experience. But overall, if you're going to use this thing as a netbook replacement, if you want to do a lot of writing with it, in addition to web browsing, and kind of want the tablet experience as well, the dock is really a must-have. Otherwise, I wouldn't really expect this to be a notebook replacement. I'm very, very careful to call it a netbook replacement. You can do some interesting things, like you can hold, there's an Alt key on the right side of the keyboard and you can do Alt-Tab to switch between recently used applications, which is nice. You can multitask. The performance of Android, of Honeycomb in general, does get kind of bogged down if you're doing a lot at the same time, or if you're really trying to use it like you would like an Ultrabook or a MacBook Air. So just because it looks like one, don't assume that really it delivers the performance or power of, like $1,000 PC. But compared to a netbook, it can definitely suffice. It's great for checking email, great for browsing the web. And like I said, you can, I've typed actually both the written review to this and some previous reviews on this keyboard, no issues. The system comes preloaded with Polaris Office, which gives you basic word processing support for Word document formats. You can actually also open Excel files and PowerPoint files in there as well. The Excel experience isn't quite as good, or the spreadsheet experience isn't quite as good as the document editing experience. And there's some rough edges, like there's no autosave function, so you have to kind of constantly be tapping save. And just little things like that make this, again, not a true notebook replacement, but if it's all you got and you just need to type out a lot of stuff and you're okay kind of dealing with the quirks, it works very well. Unlike when I first reviewed the ePad Transformer, Honeycomb has matured significantly, and one side effect of that is it doesn't crash as much. In the original Transformer review, I tried to write the whole thing in Polaris Office, but every couple of pages the thing would crash, and since there's no autosave, I would lose all my work. That didn't happen with this, and that's a huge improvement. The other thing is, because of some of the hardware improvements in here, the overall experience in Honeycomb is now much smoother. So inside this thing, compared to its predecessor, we now have an NVIDIA Tegra 3 SoC. That brings about some CPU improvements, but it also brings about a significant improvement in GPU performance. So the GPU is clocked higher. NVIDIA won't really tell us how much, and we've done a bit of digging, and can't really, it's not immediately obvious how high the GPU is clocked, but we do know it's clocked higher. And on the pixel shader side, there are 50% more pixel shader execution resources. Now, there's some situations in Honeycomb, just in interacting with the UI, that you actually feel rate limited. So having those extra execution resources on the GPU side does make everything smoother. So bringing up the all apps menu, for example, that runs at a higher frame rate. Swiping between home screens now runs at a higher frame rate. There are other little tweaks. So scrolling through the browser, for example, is a bit smoother. You don't see as much of the white block checkered stuff happening. And that's not just due to the hardware. NVIDIA's actually done some browser work here as well. So despite it looking the same, and despite this still being Honeycomb based, the version of the Honeycomb web browser on here is better threaded. It does some more OpenGL acceleration versus the default version, kind of a stopgap solution before we get to Ice Cream Sandwich. So the overall Honeycomb experience is really aided by the faster GPU here. The GPU in here obviously isn't quite iPad 2 performance, depending on the benchmark, but it's honestly good enough for what you're going to do in here. An interesting feature of the platform is NVIDIA's kind of baked in more USB controller support. So this thing apparently supports the wired Xbox 360 controller, a number of Windows USB controllers. NVIDIA sent over this Logitech gamepad. It's wireless. It's got a little USB dongle that you can plug into, not the tablet itself. There's no USB port on that. But if you have it docked, there's a USB port. So plug in the wireless adapter to that, and you can actually use this controller in supported games. As I mentioned earlier, there is micro HDMI out via the tablet. And all you really need to do is plug that into an HDMI display, preferably one with audio, because you lose audio from the tablet itself when you do that. And this thing can actually act as a little Android gaming machine. The overall gaming experience isn't quite there yet. There are no real killer apps for Android gaming, which is unfortunate, but there are things that you can definitely have fun with, and there are things that look pretty decent. Performance in those areas is obviously improved thanks to the faster GPU. On the other side, like I mentioned, the CPU is, on paper, it's actually a really big deal. So NVIDIA went from 2 cores in the Tegra 2 design to a total of 5 ARM Cortex A9 cores, 4 of which can be operated concurrently. The 5th core is a companion core. It is built on built using lower power, lower leakage transistors, is limited to a 500 megahertz clock speed. And basically the way it works is when this thing is in its sleep lock mode, as it's going through checking emails, fetching Twitter status updates, stuff like that, all of those tasks are basically serviced by the single companion core. It's a fully functional Cortex-A9. The OS just thinks, hey, I only have one core active right now, and NVIDIA's own software and firmware goes in there and makes sure that all this stuff gets scheduled on the companion core. The minute you wake it up and start demanding more of it, that companion core shuts down, and the first of the island of high-performance Cortex-A9 cores turns on. Now, that core, in its highest performance profile, can run at up to 1.4 gigahertz, whereas in the original EPAD transformer, it was limited to 1 gigahertz. And as the OS requires more performance, the other cores will wake up. So the second core will wake up. Now peak performance drops from 1.4 to 1.3. And if you have more threads that you can throw at the problem, then the third or fourth cores will wake up, and performance there is again limited to 1.3 gigahertz in their kind of best case scenario. You do have some access to governor controls. So this is something we haven't really had in Android before, and it's a great feature. I'm glad that it's in here. It's actually implemented super elegantly by ASUS and NVIDIA. So if you click on the quick settings option, the quick settings icon in Honeycomb, ASUS has customized it a bit, and you've got 3 power profiles that you can choose from. Power saving, normal, or power saving, balanced, and normal. So normal behaves exactly as I described it. You got 1.4 gigahertz for a single core that's active, 1.3 gigahertz otherwise. If you go to balanced mode, your peak CPU performance or peak clock speed drops to 1.2 gigahertz, and NVIDIA chooses a more power-friendly frequency voltage curve, right? So whereas in normal mode, this thing will always be trying to get the best performance possible. In balanced mode, it'll be a little more conscious of battery life when it does that. And power saving effectively brings this down to Tegra 2 clock speeds. So you're limited to 1 gigahertz max if you have 1 or 2 cores active. You're limited to about 700 megahertz if you've got 3 active, and limited to about 600 megahertz if you've got 4 active. Now, you don't really need to mess with any of these if you don't want to. Battery life doesn't vary all that much between them. You're looking at basically another hour or so difference between power saving and normal. In terms of actual battery life numbers, I got close to 11 hours in power saving if I'm just doing video playback. Speaking of video playback, one of the new features of the Transformer Prime and NVIDIA's Tegra 3 is the ability to play back full H.264 high-profile video content at up to 40 megabits per second. Honeycomb actually supports MKV file support or MKVs by default. So things you may already have in your collection or videos that you might download online, they will actually just work in the default Honeycomb config that ships on the platform. The biggest pain is actually just copying the massive files over there. What I actually use the Transformer dock for, as you can see here, I connected an SSD to a SATA to USB adapter, and I had a 1080p Blu-ray rip that I made on there of Quantum of Solace. It's an MKV, and it actually plays just fine. Now, if you want things like subtitle support and better ways of dealing with different types of audio tracks, you want an external player like a Dice player or something like that. But the main point is that the hardware supports it, it's fully accelerated, and it works, which is a huge improvement over where we were with the original EPAD transformer. So video stuff, video playback is finally fixed, and it's just much, much improved here. Like I said, the biggest issue is just getting the content onto the device. In terms of general usage, browsing the web, stuff like that, you're looking at about 8 to 9 hours of battery life, maybe 9.5, depending on the power saving setting. And that puts it a bit lower than the iPad 2, but definitely in the same realm. And what's important about both of these numbers is they are much higher, or at least tangibly higher, than the original EPAD transformer. And that's kind of a big deal because Tegra 3 is still built on the same 40 nanometer process as Tegra 2 was. So you're actually getting more cores, a faster GPU, and higher clocks at the same process with the same size battery, and you get better battery life running the same OS. So that's actually a pretty big deal. It's the one thing that we weren't sure NVIDIA would be able to pull off, but it was. The downside to all of this is while the GPU performance is definitely something that you notice, I don't really notice the kind of benefits, at least on the performance side, from having 4 cores. Clearly, there's some power benefits. What NVIDIA's done, as I mentioned earlier in the browser, they've done some more multi-threading there to kind of take advantage of all the cores. And as a result, what you'll have is, instead of having 2 cores running at their fastest possible voltage and frequency settings, you have 4 cores that are running at lower voltage and frequency settings. And at the end of the day, that actually contributes to delivering similar performance, but better battery life. So that aspect of NVIDIA's promise was delivered upon. The added performance, honestly, you don't really notice it that much. Web pages will sometimes load the same at the same speed as the original ePad transformer. In other cases, they'll load a bit faster. Sometimes they'll actually load a bit slower, depending on just the web page you're loading, or that particular instance of loading it. I think a lot of that has to do with some of the software changes between the browser that's running on here and the original ePad transformer. But I'd say, generally speaking, from a web browsing standpoint, performance is a wash. If you have apps that can take advantage of multiple cores, obviously the Transformer Prime is going to be better there. I would say overall usage, it doesn't hurt to have more of those cores there, especially if you're multitasking, but there's still a lot of sluggishness that's kind of built into Honeycomb that prevents that, or that ultimately gates the overall user experience in that regard. So the GPU performance, like I said, I think that's something that is the one thing you'll notice. You won't really notice the CPU performance increase. It doesn't seem to be as dramatic. But the combination of the two and a lot of the software tweaks that NVIDIA has done here result in a much smoother, much better overall platform than its predecessor. If I had to say it, I'd say that this is honestly what Honeycomb should have been like from the start. Tegra 2 was really... it was a bit underpowered for this resolution screen and what we were asking of it back when the first Honeycomb tablets appeared. And Tegra 3 is really a good fit for at least this 1280 by 800 generation of parts. Now, NVIDIA is apparently going to have a Tegra 3 Plus before its next generation SoC at the end of 2012. And its next generation SoC will follow sometime, probably sample late 2012 and go into 2013. I mentioned Wi-Fi issues earlier. ASUS has actually done something very interesting here. They actually have 2 Wi-Fi antennas, so they're doing Wi-Fi antenna diversity here. And that was actually what was broken in the second review sample I had, whereas in this one, it's actually fine. The behavior of the second one, and the reason I say this now is just in case someone happened to have gotten an early sample. Basically what you'd see is performance would kind of stop at around 16 megabits down. Whereas this, if you do, and I've got a speed test running here, you'll see that it'll kind of cap out at 16 megabits, and you'll see it kind of stay there for a second, and then the second antenna will pick up and it'll jump all the way up to 32, 33 megabits downstream, which puts it in line with its predecessor. Wi-Fi range isn't nearly as good. Again, all aluminum construction. RF doesn't travel very well through aluminum. And there's no RF window here where the antennas are. The 2 antennas are actually on opposite sides of the integrated front-facing camera. So you do get a reduction in range, and you do get lower performance as you go further away from the AP. But my concerns about directionality seem to be addressed by fully functional antenna diversity here. Overall, it's a great product. I'm very, very pleased with it. It's honestly the best Honeycomb tablet I've used. And if you are to get an Android tablet today, this is the one you want. The things that are keeping it from being perfect, honestly, Honeycomb still needs some work. And I'm hoping Ice Cream Sandwich will really smooth over a lot of those just kind of rough edges in terms of UI performance or multitasking performance. I wish the kind of gains in CPU speed were a bit more evident. And I think we'll really have to wait for Ice Cream Sandwich to figure out how much of that is just Honeycomb holding this thing back, or how much of that is just, hey, it's difficult to show performance improvement from going from 2 to 4 cores in the tablet space today. Granted, you have higher clocked CPUs, so there's a bit of that there that you do see. But overall, the improvements in GPU performance and just the platform as a whole is a lot better. So like I said, if you want an Android tablet, this is the one to get. They're going to be tough to come by through the end of the year, but I expect production availability to improve into next year.